In this video, we're going to talk about why grains probably aren't the best thing for you to eat.
Here you go, babe.
Ah, thanks, sweetheart. My favorite.
Oh, wait. I forgot something.
All right, just like I like it. Perfect. So let's go way back. The only grain you would find is wild grain. Then, about 10,000 years ago, we began to plant and cultivate grain, mainly to keep up with the demands of people gathering and living in the same area. To make grain edible back then was a lot of hard work. The process was most likely first sprouting the grain, then mashing it with rocks, and finally cooking in the sun or over fire. Today, the process looks quite different. Grain is sent to the mill, where a bulk of the nutrition is removed, and only the starchy carbohydrate is left. The remaining substance is what we call flour, and the main benefit is that it pretty much remains pest-free, because there's really nothing in it that the pests want. You'd think we'd take that as a cue. And actually, we realized this back in the 1940s and began to add vitamins and minerals back into the flour.
On top of our modern way of processing, we are now using genetically modified seeds, synthetic fertilizers, and chemical pesticides. All this makes grain resistant to drought and pests. And actually, no other animal wants to touch it other than us. And get this. A common harvesting protocol in the U.S. is to drench wheat fields with Roundup several days before, which allows for an earlier, easier, and bigger harvest. Dr. Stephanie Seneff of MIT, who has studied the issue in depth, found that almost all non-organic wheat in the U.S. is now contaminated with glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup.
Sweetheart, would you pass the glyphosate, please?
Sure.
That is perfect. Whoa.
As you can probably imagine, ingesting this chemical causes all kinds of problems, including gut dysfunction, chronic disease, and other disorders.
Even when grains were more nutrient dense and not treated with chemicals, history leads us to believe they were still only consumed when other foods were not available. You may have heard of Ezekiel bread, where the recipe is actually spelled out in the Bible. If we look at the context, the book of Ezekiel was not a pleasant time. Actually, right before the recipe was given, a prediction is given that Ezekiel's city is about to be destroyed. So the bread, in this case, is simply a means of survival. Then, there's a story of Moses and God's people leaving Egypt. And these guys left slavery, and while on their way to the abundant land that God was giving them, they got caught up complaining about everything, which resulted in an 11-day journey lasting 40 years. They were in the wilderness this whole time, where there was nothing to eat, so God graciously rained food down from heaven for them to survive. The food was called manna, and it resembled some sort of a bread. Funny thing is, they ended up getting tired of manna and complained for something else to eat. So, stories in the Bible show us that there are times where grains may be necessary to survive, but there's no indication that we should eat them otherwise. In other words, grains may be linked to tough times, but they are not linked to times where life is thriving.
Aside from everything we've already talked about, there are actually 3 substances in grains that we could live without. First up, phytates, which bind to dietary minerals and prevent their absorption. In other words, they get the nutrients, not you. Phytates are also found in nuts and seeds, but in lesser quantities. It's the amount of phytates in grains that cause the problem. Secondly, and I know you've heard this one, gluten. Similar to phytates, gluten usually doesn't cause a problem in small quantities. But modern technology has increased the amount of gluten in wheat so much that wheat is about 80% gluten. The last problem maker is lectin. Lectins are so small and hard to digest that they tend to accumulate in your body, causing damage to the lining of your gut. Lectins also cause your body's hunger signal to be suppressed, making you think you're hungry when you're really not.
Even after all this, you may still be asking yourself, isn't it okay to eat whole grains as long as I stay away from processed grain? This is definitely a valid question, and there is a health benefit to swapping white flour products with whole grain. But the real health benefit is to get rid of all grains altogether. Mark Sisson, author of The Primal Blueprint, says, apart from maintaining social conventions in certain situations and obtaining cheap sugar calories, there is absolutely no reason to eat grains. What he is really saying is that there is really no good reason to eat grains. The bottom line? Our bodies may be able to survive on grains, but they do not thrive on grains. Of all the habits you can develop regarding your health, dropping grains is probably the one that will pay off the most.
So trade the grains for lean meats, quality fats, and organic fruits and vegetables. You won't regret it.